Okay, geez, that took forever to go live. Sorry, there was a delay, so let me know if you guys can hear me, see me clearly, if I'm not freezing. But didn't you miss me? It's only been about 24 hours, and there's so much going on today with what's happening in the space world. I figured I might as well just look into some of the articles, read the headlines live, and maybe do a little bit of a recap since yesterday was such a interesting day with the news presser about Starliner. A lot of questions, a lot of comments, and a lot of attention on this issue. And so I figured that I would just go live. And I know that you guys are probably wanting to hang out. I see that it's not working on X. Let me see if I can look into that. If anyone else is on X, let me know if you can see me, you can hear me. Testing 1, 2, 3. But just scanning the internet today. Let me share my screen here. So Google search of Boeing Starliner. Can you guys see it? Top news. Let's read some of the headlines. We're also going to talk about Boeing's new CEO taking over today. So we'll learn more about Robert Kelly Ortberg. But first, I wanted to just read some of the headlines. After yesterday's presser. So this is obviously a top story. New York Times. NASA says Boeing Starliner astronauts may fly home on SpaceX in 2025. Accurate, not sensational. Uh, this title's pretty long. It gets cut off. Boeing Starliner astronauts have now been in space more than 60 days with no end in. I'm guessing that the blank is sight there. I think the word is sight. Boeing's Starliner spacecraft may not be able to fly astronauts back to Earth. And that's been kind of a confusing issue for some people because the software has the capability, but the current data load is not configured to do that. So I'm not a software engineer. I've had a couple discussions with software engineers. Some say what Boeing is saying, or NASA rather, is not doesn't really make much sense. It's kind of, like tap dancing around the issue or doesn't really make sense. Then you have other people that I've read comments from say, this makes sense to me. Ellie, you're an idiot. You don't understand software. So I think that this is, a confusing point for many people. And I know that Eric Berger has touched on this a lot. He was asking about it yesterday. And so it would be interesting to get sort of an expert on the channel. I've reached out to one person, but try to reach out to more to see if we can have someone explain this in better terms for those of us who don't understand why this obviously was a capability in 2022 and why couldn't there be an option for both on the current configuration. That part I'm a little confused by. I'm also wondering why the Teflon poppet seals weren't an issue on the first flight, and now they are. So some of these questions, it would be great to get some answers. And so yeah, the headline here that I was looking at, and I just thought was ridiculous, is this one from the Daily Mail. So I guess we're probably not too surprised by that. Exclusive revealed. Stranded NASA astronauts could be vaporized on terrifying mission to return to Earth in faulty Boeing Starliner spaceship. I'll admit, I haven't exactly been sugarcoating things, but my goodness, that is that is something else. So headline kind of made me laugh. Let's read what Daily Mail has to say. 2 NASA astronauts have been stranded in space for months due to a fault with Boeing's spacecraft, but their return to Earth could be even more terrifying. Okay, I agree with the first half of that. Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmore were only supposed to be on the International Space Station for 8 days when they launched on Boeing Starliner on June 5th. Correct. Truth. But a fault with the capsule's thrusters, critical to propel the craft through space, means they've been stuck there for over 2 months, correct, over 60 days and counting. And NASA says they might not return until February next year. And that was the big sort of jaw-dropping moment yesterday when I heard that on the conference as February as a potential return, the probably likely return. I'm like, that's crazy. I mean, they're going to miss, I don't know their family situation. I'm guessing they probably have kids or maybe at least a spouse. They're going to miss, Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Super Bowl, you name it, all sorts of stuff. And so, I think a lot of people are under the impression of, oh no, I'm sure they're really, really glad to be, still in space. And I'm like, I don't know. I think at a certain point, especially if they were only planning to be there for a much shorter amount of time, what impact does this have on their bodies? Because this is a much more extended stay for them than they were planning on. And I know that NASA is saying that they were prepared for this to be a longer duration mission, but one of the headlines was the batteries were only certified for 45 days. What does that recertification process look like? And if it is up there for longer, I mean, how long can it really be up there before it actually starts to encounter other issues just because, hey, it wasn't meant to be up there as long or rated to be up there as long as it is. So we still have a lot of questions. And the media really grilled NASA yesterday. And I think it's just due to a sort of buildup of, hey, why are we not getting, every other day briefings on this? Why is this being so spread out? And then when we try to get answers, it's kind of, beating around the bush and tap dancing, a little bit of a word salad. So man, I would not want to be Ken or Steve in yesterday's conference or Dana even. That was pretty brutal. Oh shoot, there's an ad up. Well, that's gross. Let me close that. So let's keep reading this one. The space agency is now deciding whether to persist with the faulty Starliner. Correct. I mean, they're still trying to fix the issues with Starliner, and some of those they think that they have a better understanding based on the ground tests that they've done at White Sands, but there's still what we learned yesterday is they're admitting that there's internal disagreement or dissent over the safety of this. And so there is more transparency, but we're not getting all the answers we want. And if so, they would have to launch a rescue mission using SpaceX's rival ship, which would be hugely embarrassing for Boeing. Well, I think it's important to put egos and embarrassment aside for the safety of Butch and Sonny. I understand that they're test pilots and they're willing to assume more risk, but man, I mean, I think NASA should tread with caution. Rudy Rodolphi, a former space system commander in the US military, explained three frightening scenarios that could play out if they choose to go with the former, including a worst case scenario that would see the crew burning up inside the capsule upon reentry. So when Joe and I talked about this, Joe Tegtmeyer, we outlined, the good, the moderate scenario, and the worst case scenario. And we really didn't talk about that one so much. We talked about them not having control due to the thrusters if they were to undock and get to a point of sort of no return. This idea of sort of being lost in space. But let's see this graphic from the Daily Mail. Starliner's deadly return mission. I mean, they are really, really sensationalizing this. Okay, so we have the ISS here. Scenario one, stuck in space. Thrusters fail, 96 hours of oxygen and power. And this was kind of the worst case scenario that Joe and I were talking about, is that, we really don't want the scenario where they're actually stuck in space. And there's been a lot of debate over stuck versus stranded versus, well, no, come on, you can't say that. And I've seen some of my colleagues get very upset at me saying even that they're stuck. And I would ask, well, what is the alternative? They cannot go home right now if they wanted to. So why do we have to tiptoe around saying that they're stuck? Again, granted, I think if there were an absolute emergency aboard the ISS, they would fly home in Starliner and assume the risks, which may actually not be that big of risks. But of course, NASA and Boeing have to be very careful with human life involved. But I'm not sure why even saying that they're stuck or stranded has, been so contentious. So scenario two, bounces off the atmosphere. Service module fails to line up reentry, space docking rescue mission, which is something we talked about too. There is, a point where they would be able to return more easily, and then maybe not so much. Scenario three, look at these flames. This is so dramatic. It vaporizes in the atmosphere. Astronauts burn up in the atmosphere. Service module fails to align capsule. So they're really going for it. um, I don't think I've said that once, but Starliner's problems are located in the service module, which is like the control center for the entire ship, containing systems that control the thruster's power, as well as water and oxygen for the occupants. The module located at the bottom of the capsule is also critical for aligning the craft for re-entry before it jettison away before re-entry. Service module must put the capsule at an angled altitude in order for it to re-enter Earth. If the angle is off, the craft would bounce off the atmosphere, leaving NASA to scramble to locate it in orbit. If the angle is too steep, there's more friction and a greater chance of burning up in the atmosphere, vaporizing the occupants. So it sounds like they did talk to, an expert or someone who has a little bit better handle on the subject matter, but they're really, really going with the if it bleeds, it leads mentality. So long as the capsule is lined up correct for reentry, everything is fine. Correct. But if the capsule is not lined up, and again, we need those thrusters to work in order for that to happen, they either burn up or bounce back into space. So, I'd be curious to know what the percentages we're looking at. Scott Manley did a great video talking about this and saying that he thinks it's, probably a less than 1% chance that any of these terrible scenarios could happen, but that's still a chance. It's a non-zero chance. And wow, there's a lot of comments. Sorry, I've been reading the article. I'm shocked that so many people are watching and care. Yeah, Bishop, you make a great point. The actual worst case scenario, they never said, is it could explode attached and kill everyone on ISS. And they did that hot fire test while docked to the ISS. So let's see here. Yeah, Ross says that's a distasteful statement from the Daily Mail. And if anyone in the chat, I mean, screw it, we're live, we're talking live. If anyone in the chat is actually a software expert, someone who thinks that they can explain the situation better to us who don't have a background in this, please leave a comment and let me know, because I'll literally send you the link to this and we can talk about it live. You can do FaceTime, you can do whatever. Stephen Lawrence says, Ellie, may I politely request you respond to some of the comments? And by the way, I'm just going to throw my email in here so that if someone wants to, school me on this, go for it. Let me know. I politely request you respond to some of the comments. There are some really good ones. Okay, let's talk about it. Rodney, thank you for the super chat. You appreciate my work. I appreciate you joining us today. By the way, I have about an hour and a half until my Pilates class. So I was like, you know what? Screw it. We're going to go live. We're going to talk about this. So where was I here? Yeah, here's the Daily Mail article. Pretty dramatic. And I'm hoping that Joe Tegtmeyer will also hop on soon to talk about the new Boeing CEO. But let's see. Let me scroll back in the comments. Let me scroll back and let me actually load my Boeing B-roll, because you guys like to watch B-roll. Helps keep it more interesting. So, all right, let's go back to the top. Starliner seems so antiquated to what Dragon is. I would agree with you. Talk about status. Ellie is on the same time slot as the Trump presser. Well, I will say this. I was contacted this morning by CBS's Inside Edition for an interview about this, and I was very excited. And then they canceled, which, that's fine. I know how the news business is. Hopefully they reach back out. But anyway, I got ready for an interview and then it got canceled. So I was like, screw it, I should do something. Good evening from the Netherlands. Good evening to you, Bert. Thanks for watching. Space enthusiast Boeing doesn't understand their software either. Well, I will say the explanation, and let me try to pull up the Ars Technica because Eric Berger has been just the star of the show with bringing us the latest. So he wrote an article yesterday after the presser. NASA official acknowledges internal disagreement on safety of Starliner return. But I want to get to the point about the software because if you didn't listen to the explanation or you didn't listen to it live, he kind of has verbatim here what was said about, hey, why was this able to autonomously undock in May of 22? And now here we are with an actual crew. And now you can't do that yet, although it's capable of it. But what happened? So Steve Stitch was grilled yesterday. Here's what the article from Ars Technica says. Stitch also explained why it would take a few weeks to reconfigure the software package on board Starliner to allow for a safe undocking of the spacecraft without crew. This is one reason the Crew 9 mission launch was pushed from August 18th to late September, which we know about that. And, that is possibly how Butch and Sunny are going to come home on that Crew 9 return in February. Anyway, although the capability to undock without a crew exists within the flight software on Starliner. So there is a capability within the flight software on the current Starliner, which again is a different spacecraft than the one from 2022, but it exists. However, it is currently configured for crew operations. Okay, well, why can't it be configured for both is my question. But again, I'm not an expert. Quote, that is, during the process of undocking and moving away from the space station, the flight software takes certain actions and the crew takes certain actions. This configuration change toward integrated operations between software and crew was made after the previous autonomous flight of Starliner in 2022 that flew to the space station and back. So why was this change made to be, why can't they be, both options? I don't understand that. Someone explain it to me, please. Essentially, and this is quote, essentially what we're asking the team to do is to go back 2 years in time and resurrect the software parameters that are required to give automatic responses to breakouts near the ISS should we have a problem in close to ISS, which the software now allows them to do manually. Going back in time 2 years is not that long. I'm not sure what they have to resurrect and why. And I understand some of the delay is not just the actual update of the configurations, it's testing to make sure it works and they didn't miss anything. But why can they both be an option? Someone please explain it to me, and I'll check my email in a second. Maybe there's a lucky caller. I wish I was like on a radio. I could just give you guys a phone number to call in. And then Steve goes on to say, the team is always updating these mission data loads as different things change. Why? How hard is it to update it? I don't know. No work has been done on the autonomous software package since the flight in 2022. Ars reported that it would take about 4 weeks to complete testing of this configuration change, and Steve Stitch confirmed this. He said, quote, before we go execute that, it's just smart and responsible to take their software and mission data loads in this configuration, go into the integrated test facility where all the flight software resides, and go run it through some test cases just to make sure we haven't missed anything. That's really what would take time if we were to pivot to an uncrewed undock. Well, it sounds like they should make that change now, no matter what, so that they don't continue to delay things, so that they have that option. So I thought that that was really interesting and hopefully shed some light on why, this is rough. Ross says you could start an X space. So far, I see a no one in my email. Wishful thinking, I guess. By the way, I saw that someone is using my photo, but calling themselves a different name to pretend to be Elon's assistant named Tiffany, but it's a photo of me. That is fake news. So let's see here. Tin Man says Starliner updates need to take into account the orbital parameters present as Starliner exists. Both software, manual, and automated can exist together, just wasn't chosen for certification. And that's what my guess would be, is that this is a possibility, but why they didn't go with it, I just don't know. I don't get it. Ross says they should have tested the software as they went along. The old software not compatible with the new OS. Again, if there's someone who can explain this to me better than I can understand it, let me know. I'd love to talk about it. Here we go. Neil, I am a software developer and we need more specifics. The quote configuration could be data, code, or both. Sounds like a poorly designed system regardless. And that's sort of the consensus that I'm hearing from, the experts in this field, is that this just this is like a weird excuse. It's kind of inexcusable. Skytech wants to know who is the new CEO. So let me switch tabs here and we'll talk about it. So Boeing's new outsider CEO, Ortberg, takes the helm, this time from the factory floor. And again, just reading these articles with you from CNBC. This one published today, updated 3 hours ago. So this is very much newsworthy. So let's talk about Boeing's new CEO, which I do not envy his position. And hopefully he can really make some change. It's very hard to make change within a, company that big, that's kind of set in its ways. Boeing's new CEO, Robert Kelly Ortberg, takes the reins of the aerospace giant on Thursday today. The 64-year-old aerospace veteran previously headed supplier Rockwell Collins. He inherits a company mired in safety and manufacturing crisis. And isn't that the truth? Here he is. Robert, you're a brave man. You're a very brave man. And I wish you the best of luck. It's got to be, it's so weird that we live in an era of people saying, if it's Boeing, I ain't going. And we're talking about obviously airlines here. Not all of us are going to go to space yet. But if it's Boeing, I ain't going. Do you know how hard that would actually be to pull off? So what, you're going to try to make sure it's an Airbus every single time? No, you're not. So it's a weird time that we live in. Aerospace veteran Robert Kelly Ortberg becomes Boeing's new CEO today. He has a singular mission: restoring the reputation of a U.S. manufacturing icon. And, I'm only 32. I know many of my viewers are much older. And so you probably can understand more of wow, this is a pretty crazy shift to see Boeing sort of go from being an industry leader and like it says here, a manufacturing icon to hated, people distrusting of, and I think in many ways for good reason. The enormous goal will involve thousands of daily decisions that will determine whether Boeing can earn back the trust of regulators, airlines, and the public, end persistent production defects, deliver aircraft on time and consistently to customers, large and small, and stop burning cash. The cash burn running about $8 billion so far this year and counting. Meanwhile, Boeing shares are down some 37% so far in 2024. So what is he doing today on his first day, orientation day? Let's go around and say our names. He's walking the floor of Boeing's factory in Renton, Washington, not far from where I lived in Tri-Cities, where it builds its best-selling problematic 737 MAX. He plans to talk with employees and review safety and quality plans with similar visits ahead at other Boeing plants. I can't tell you how proud and excited I am to be a member of the Boeing team, he said in a note to staff on Thursday. Dude, I'd be like, I can't tell you how anxious and nervous I am. While we clearly have a lot of work to do in restoring trust, I'm confident that working together, we will return the company to be the industry leader we all expect. Well, I should reach out to him for an interview because, let's talk about it. Analysts and industry insiders are cautiously upbeat, painting the 64-year-old Ortberg, a more than 3-decade veteran of the industry who spent years atop commercial and defense supplier Rockwell Collins. After working up the ranks there as a good listener with an engineering background, he has a mechanical engineering degree. Perhaps most importantly, he is a Boeing outsider, which I think is important. He has a fantastic reputation and level of experience in the industry, and he has a reputation for listening and for letting people push back. And that's important because, there is a rumor or a conspiracy that there is deliberate silencing at Boeing for pushing back or for maybe say blowing the whistle. So I have, high hopes for him. And let me Joe Tegmeyer's here. Whoa. Hello.
Hi. What did I miss?
Talk again.
Hello.
Wow.
Can
Okay.
you hear me?
Yes, I can. Let me know how it sounds to you guys because I don't hear any feedback. And yesterday our feedback was really bad.
Okay. Well, I'll
Do you
talk
have?
a little bit. And does it sound okay? Any feedback? Any issues from your viewers?
It sounds good to me, except for me looking like a dork now in headphones, but that's fine.
I thought I would
I feel
wear
like,
my old Apollo 13.
oh, nice. Nice.
Kind of appropriate for it.
Failure.
Yes.
Yes. What an interesting day. I was bummed because I was ready to go to talk on Inside Edition about
Yeah.
Starliner. They invited me and then they canceled, but that's fine.
Okay. Well, maybe next time.
Maybe next time. But what an interesting day yesterday. And I was reading a Daily Mail headline that says Boeing astronauts could be vaporized in, deadly burn up in the atmosphere. So they really went with the negative headline.
Try to get the clickbait to the maximum amount.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about worst case scenarios or bad scenarios, but we certainly never said that. So.
Yeah, I've seen some pretty bad takes on it. Everything from they're stranded till February and its decision's already been made, and not quite. I think that we have about a week or so to go for them to think through all what they want to do.
Well, you were sending me some. Let's see if I can pull up your article because I think we should talk about it. Share this tab instead. Okay, let's see if it switched the tab here. Hold on a second. Okay, now you can see it, right?
Yes.
Okay, so Joe Tegtmeyer tweeted, new NASA Office Inspector General report on the upcoming Space Launch System, SLS, upgrades and development. Some interesting findings and concerns, especially with Boeing space workforce training and experience, screenshots of the executive summary. So let's talk about this. NASA's management of Space Launch System Block 1B development. So what stood out to you here in this audit?
Well, first of all, this is a continuing series of audits. They audited the Gateway, which is part of the Artemis program for the moon. Now they're auditing the Space Launch System, the SLS rocket, which will be used to take the astronauts from the Earth in the Orion capsule and get it to the moon. And depending on which Artemis flight, it would either be rendezvousing with that Gateway or rendezvousing with the human landing system, which would be at least initially the Starship to land on the moon, or eventually it could be the Blue Origin version of that, or other stuff. But But as it is right now, the existing version of SLS is not powerful enough for what they're going to need for future Artemis missions. It's kind of good enough for now. Could basically take the Orion capsule, but it can't take anything else. So they need something more powerful. So the Block 1 is sort of that new or more powerful version of SLS, and it's been in development for some time. And it is obviously part of Boeing, and they have the contract for that. And, a couple of things that stood out to me. First of all, we had the press conference yesterday. We're talking about Starliner in the press conference yesterday. And we know that there's a lot of discussions going on behind the scenes. I have a feeling that this report they knew it was about to come out. So I'm sure that and other things are weighing on their mind in addition to what's just going on with Starliner. So when I've talked in the past about decisions are made based on risk, but also on stakeholders, this is an example of the stuff that's kind of going on behind the scenes and why whatever decision that they may make in a Starliner may carry over to what's going on with the SLS. So when you take that into context and you look at this report, some of the things that kind of stand out is the fact that not only is SLS way delayed, way over budget, but they're also looking at the workforce. The part of it is the location. It's in Louisiana, which they talk about having difficulty attracting in a lot of the high quality people that they need because of the location. They also talk about just the training, the lack of experience that a lot of the workforce has with operational space systems. And that's something commercial space like SpaceX, Rocket Lab, some of the other like Firefly is starting to build it where they get that cadence, they get that experience. That's something that is definitely needed. And that's something that maybe the workforce of Boeing doesn't have. And they were talking about how they had inspectors watching what's going on with Boeing, and they had a number of issues that they had brought up, and whether or not they were being resolved in a proper manner. The report here was very skeptical about that, and they had in the end they had 4 primary recommendations to the NASA leadership of what to do. And 3 of the 4 were accepted, but one of the ones was not. And that is on this slide here. And it's the second one. And it's basically recommending that NASA would institute financial penalties for Boeing's non-compliance with quality control standards. And NASA pushed back on that, and they non-concurred. And, so
break that down. Like, why is that so relevant?
Okay, well, the contract that SLS is on with Boeing from NASA is something called a cost plus contract, which means that the contractor, in this case Boeing, said, we think it's going to cost this amount of money to do this project. So NASA says, okay, we'll award you the contract. And then during the development of that project, if costs become higher, if maybe they underestimated certain costs, things were more complicated, issues come up, then the burden of paying is on NASA. So if Boeing says we need another year and another $500 million, NASA is obligated to give them a year and $500 million. And that's something that people have in the past pointed to as a problem because it kind of incentivizes you to draw out the production of whatever you're making. And, if you incur costs, then you can benefit from that. Now, from a contractor standpoint, one of the reasons why cost plus is done is that I've seen this in the military in the past where a weapon system, say, was being procured, and during the procurement process, the requirements were changing. So if I said, hey, Ellie, I want you to be a plane that can go Mach 1 with 2 engines, and then halfway through I say, no, I want Mach 2 with 5 engines, that's going to be a lot more cost on you. So it's meant to protect the contractor in case I, as the person asking you and setting the requirements, keep changing them and making it more difficult for you. But in reality, that's not what actually happens, or what it's like a combination. There's some requirement changes, but there's also drawing things out. And the non-concurrence on that recommendation stood out to me is because it basically says, from the standpoint of the auditor, it's saying, NASA, you should be able to hold Boeing responsible for non-complying with quality control standards, which are set forth by law and certain occupational standards. And with NASA saying no, the auditor is saying, well, that's really not great because you're not holding them to the fire. What NASA is trying to say is, well, within the contract, we have means of dealing with that, but history shows that that's not the case. So that's why I think that's a big deal.
Now, you were saying that, oh man, I still hear the feedback. That's so weird. Sorry if there's feedback. So you were saying that depending on what decision they make, whether they're going to use Starliner or Dragon, that this could impact SLS. So tell me the scenario, whichever one they choose, why you think that it would have that trickle effect of SLS being affected.
No. Well, again, this is just my opinion. So you can, there will be some people that will disagree with it, but just thinking about it, thinking it through, if Boeing is the prime contractor for two of these systems, and on one system, we found that they were not meeting the requirements. They were not able to provide an operational mission. It was creating delays. It was impacting schedules. It was impacting a lot of different parts to the piece of taking astronauts to the ISS, keeping the ISS running. Then why would they not then look at other reports or reports like what we just saw here, saying that they're having similar problems throughout all of their space systems? Why would that not be part of the consideration when you're thinking about, moving forward? So I think that would be part of it. I think if they were to come online and say, hey, this is an extreme case, but let's say we don't have faith in the Starliner, we're not going to bring the astronauts back. And oh, by the way, either through NASA, Boeing, or a combination, they terminate the program. I just don't see, I see that becoming a problem for people, decision makers, thinking about what are we going to do with the Artemis program? What are we going to do with these reports that we see? How do we hold people to the fire, their feet to the fire? How do we get refunded back if there is any refunding for the amount of money that they spent on the Starliner? So, my thinking is that that depending on the decision and how this thing works out, I believe it will affect thinking about Artemis and as we move forward. And especially when we have reports like what we just saw here. We also have the report on the Gateway, which I mentioned before. And the big issues on that is it's becoming over cost. It's over its mass weight, which means it will be, they may or may not be able to have the performance with the Falcon Heavy to launch it to lunar orbit. And also there's an issue with the Gateway itself being able to do proper station keeping with the HLS Starship docked to it, and that because of the amount of mass between the Gateway, which is about 10 or 15 times smaller than the Starship, and it won't have enough performance to do the station keeping as it's originally envisioned. So, like I said, if you think about this as a whole and you start putting all of these pieces together, it can't be something that is overlooked. And I would imagine that it would definitely affect other parts of the program that Boeing would be involved with.
Let's talk about some change at Boeing. Let me share a different tab here. I was just talking about this before you hopped on. Boeing has new CEO who's taken a tour of the factory floor today. What do you think about this guy and actually making change and getting trust back from the public?
Well, I think that's going to be a long challenge. It's going to take some time. And, it's more than just, we got a new CEO. And in this case, I think he's touring the 737 production facility right now, kind of a symbolic measure of, hey, I'm going to go to the floor. I'm going to talk to the workers. That is sort of trying to harken back to the early days of Boeing, where the leadership was up, where they were on the floor, they were engineers, they were right there. So I think he's trying to start right off the bat. But a couple of things. One, sometimes you're overcome events in the news cycle, and I know that they probably planned this trip for a while, the first day that he became CEO, but he's going to Boeing Aerospace. He's not going, the airplane part. He's not going to the space part. So that's kind of a symbolic thing right there. The other thing is that, it's not just a CEO. You have a lot of people that are running the organization. And I don't know how many people he's bringing in, replacing. That may take some time. So that means that most of the leadership is going to be in place for a period of time. So, you can tell people we're going to do things differently, but it takes a while to do that.
Right.
Another thing, the report, they talked about the workforce, the training experience. That's not something you can just do. And it's also not just affecting Boeing. We've heard many other companies, like, for example, Tesla, when they were thinking about where Giga Texas should go, one of the biggest requirements was they wanted to go to a place where they could get a workforce that was that had the right skill sets and education. And we've heard that before. We've also heard through SpaceX talking about how difficult it is to get a lot of the qualified people. That's affecting everybody. So that's not going to be fixed right off the bat either.
Now, obviously, if he's touring 737, I hear the feedback so bad. I don't know why that is. If he's touring 737 MAX, factory floor, does he have is he going to be like overseeing or in charge of anything related to Starliner?
Well, he's the CEO of Boeing. So all of the various divisions underneath Boeing would be part of him. And, they have multiple ones. But probably the two biggest are the aviation one and space.
Right.
And,
right.
Both are having challenges right now. And
I know. It's unfortunate that they're both, really getting a lot of heat.
Yeah.
Might have been a dumb question, but I just wanted to clarify. By the way, we may have a special guest in a few minutes here, may or may not. So okay. I will be sure to add him to the chat if that happens.
Yeah.
And so let's just talk a little bit more about yesterday. So here was that headline I was talking about. Stranded NASA astronauts could be vaporized on terrifying mission to return to Earth in faulty Boeing spacecraft. I think this headline's a little bit more balanced. NASA says Boeing Starliner astronauts may have to come home on different spacecraft. What do you think about, because someone asked, I've seen a couple questions in my feed since the conference, and why do you think that there was a problem with the Teflon poppet seals this time, but not in 2022 when it did basically an identical mission?
Well, I guess the answer is we don't know if there was a problem or not, because they did have thruster issues in the previous mission as well. But I don't recall being told down to the granular level of what exactly the issues were. They could have been similar. Maybe it would have something completely different. One would hope that they didn't have the same issue and it's carrying over, but it's possible.
Wow, that would be kind of crazy to find out.
But I just don't know if we know enough to be able to say for sure.
Do you think that they launched, with people too soon?
Well, I guess on a technical matter, probably maybe yes, because they've had so many challenges and they have not had a perfectly successful launch yet. That this is their third launch. This is the first one with people. The first two were unmanned, and in each one they had some significant issues that required a lot of rework. So probably yes. We've got to get this moving, looking at a programmatic kind of way. There are a couple of constraints. Not only is it the cost and the scheduling and the timing and that, but also, if I understand correctly, the Atlas that's used to launch the Starliner, there's no more of them freed up. There are still versions of that available, but I think Amazon has already purchased them to launch their Kuiper satellites, our Kuiper satellites. And if they were to do another test launch, they would probably have to get that, maybe work with Amazon to buy one back or figure out another option. So, as far as the program test, the test program to get it to this point, they've kind of used up their launch capabilities. So I think that maybe was a factor that they were thinking about as well. But certainly it's not, I don't think anybody, NASA, Boeing, the teams, the astronauts, I don't think anybody's happy with where it is right now, and kind of wishing that maybe other training or other testing had been done.
Well, tell me this, $5.8 billion spent so far on the Starliner program. Much less was spent on the SpaceX's Dragon program, which is obviously successful. Why does SpaceX make it look so easy, and that Boeing is having so many problems making, a second option?
Well, I think part of it is just the organizational culture that is within the companies. Boeing's been around for a lot longer. They are much more institutionalized. They're used to a way of working that in the past has worked pretty well. They didn't really have to compete as far as with peers on the commercial space. And I think that, their culture didn't really allow for a lot of, ingenuity, getting, young people in, or young at mind, as Elon would say, in trying different things. We've seen the speed that SpaceX approaches their issues and the solutions, the testing, and then getting it up and operational again. So I think that, SpaceX is more of, and I would say Rocket Lab, maybe Firefly, they're much more of like a startup kind of mentality. I think it attracts people that are not only very qualified and, bring a lot of technical capabilities, but one of the things that I've been saying a long time is that if you go work for like SpaceX, the chances are whatever hardware, software program that you're working on is actually going to fly, and you're actually going to see it working, is much higher than if you're at other companies. For example, I think the Block 1 version of SLS, by the time it flies, will have been in development for over 15 years, and that would be for the first flight. So that basically means almost an entire career. And the thing that you're working on never flew, and maybe at the very end of your career. So I think maybe that has something to do with it.
Wow. Thank you, Tin Man, for pointing out that you can join my Patreon to support my channel. Crazy. Yesterday, we had over 5,000 people watching that live stream. I think there was a lot of interest in the presser, and man, some interesting answers to some really tough questions, or in some cases, non-answers.
Well, I hope what we talked about yesterday and what we're kind of talking about today just sort of gives kind of highlights the fact that no one decision is simple. There's not a simple solution. There's always all kinds of different parts and pieces to the decision-making process. And every time you make a decision, there's a ripple effect beyond that. So, I'm hoping at least that part comes out.
I'm going to see if I mute you again. Okay, now I don't hear the feedback. Yeah, some people are saying I heard very few answers on that stream. I would agree with that. I feel like some of the reporters, Michael Sheets, sounded frustrated. He's like, okay, so, you say you have to make a decision about Crew 9 or not. And so when are you going to make that decision? Again, I don't envy being in their position, but let's talk a little bit too. So we learned also, and this just got buried, there's so much news, but Polaris Dawn now looking for August 26th as a launch date.
Yeah. So that means before Starship, it means before Crew 9. So that means that's the next up for a manned launch out of the United States. So that's pretty exciting. And, in a way, it's almost kind of a flex by SpaceX if they pull it off and everything goes well. It's like, okay, well, we're going to launch our own and we're going to do all these things, some of which the altitude that they're going to is the first time since Gemini that we've gone that high. And, the amount of testing that they want to do with equipment, also with, the space adaptation syndrome and other biological things. They're testing out a capability of doing a spacewalk, and the spacesuit is a design that's in an iterative process, but it in and of itself is meant to start us on the path of basically disrupting the entire spacesuit industry. How do we build spacesuits? How do we train people? How do we have thousands of people in space in spacesuits versus what we've done in the past, where we have a couple and they're $1 billion spacesuits that, that's just unsustainable. So it's pretty cool.
Right. And again, we've had a few people ask the question, will Butch and Sunny need different suits? And yes, of course. So the intention is to bring those suits, which apparently have been identified, up with Crew 9, which I really think that that's going to be how it plays out. I'd be surprised if they actually do come home on Starliner, but I guess we'll have to see what happens. Now, there's been a lot of criticism too about Boeing not being on the call. Do you think that was deliberate on Boeing's behalf, or this was a decision by NASA?
It was deliberate by NASA. And I think we kind of talked about it before, is NASA did not want SpaceX on because I think it would put SpaceX in a bad situation to be commenting on things that haven't been determined, and it has to do with your competitor. I think they wanted Boeing off of it. One, because I think NASA wanted to keep on message, and two, I think, because we've heard that there are some disagreements, that maybe it was probably good for NASA not to have Boeing on for that particular one, or they made that choice. We also know that the next day, today, they have a new CEO. So maybe that played into it as well. And also the report just came out today, and I'm sure that they knew about that. So I think maybe they just made that decision to keep it as NASA and simplify the type of questions, because everything had to be focused on what is NASA going to do and not what you, Boeing, are doing or didn't do. So I think it was deliberate.
Talk about, you've had a day or so to think about the press conference. What lingering question, aside from like, okay, they're probably going to announce next week how they're choosing to go home, but any other lingering questions that weren't asked about?
Yeah, a couple of them. I don't know if they could have answered them, but one of them has to do again with the software. And I know that there's some discussion about, is it the software wasn't uploaded? Is it parameters of software? Why does it take so long to update the software and validate it? But the big question I have, or I think needs to be looked at, is, did NASA know that the Starliner in the configuration that it was in was not capable without some sort of software or parameter update? But did they know that it was not capable of autonomously undocking and returning? Because if NASA knew, then they should have included that into their contingency planning and said up front, hey, well, we would like to send a rescue mission, but we have a problem with Starliner because we don't have the ability to have it go back by itself. Or if NASA didn't know, I think that's a huge foul on Boeing, because they're contractually supposed to be able to provide a ship that has certain criteria that meet requirements set forth in the contract. And also, as soon as issues came up, they should have told NASA, hey, whatever you decide, you have to take into account the fact that we can't undock it autonomously right now. I think that was a huge miss.
So you're saying that there's no way that Boeing didn't know?
They had to have known. Whenever you do missions like this, you look at all kinds of various decision trees and possibilities. And a possibility should have been envisioned that some reason the crew was incapacitated or something happened and we need to get them home, but we need to do it autonomously. But in the configuration that it was sent up, it can't do that. That had to have been, somebody had to have realized that. And I think that was a big deal that was kind of not, I mean, it was covered, but it was kind of glossed over. And I'm sure if I were the decision makers at NASA, I would have been pretty upset about that, finding out that I did not have a option that I thought I had.
Yeah. Let's see. I don't know. What do you think about this user, the brown noser? It was deliberate and good management and communication strategy. They don't need the media to kick them around right now. We know there are problems, and NASA's act is not exactly 100%. Are we being too hard on Boeing and NASA?
I don't think so. We're talking about a national space program with people and budgets in billions of dollars and lots of jobs and a lot of people involved across the country on this. No, I don't think so at all. I think, you know, if they're going to be doing this, then I think they need to be held accountable. I would amend that by saying everybody that's in this space needs to be held accountable. And, you know, we see that with the commercial space companies as they're developing things, they have oversight as well, whether it's FAA through NASA contracts or whatnot. So everybody needs to be held at a common standard. And in my opinion, it shouldn't matter if you've been around for 100 years or 5 years. If you're going to play in this space, you need to be able to hit certain standards. And if somebody says that they can do something and you award a contract and you pay them and then they're not able to perform, that's a problem.
Yeah. Tell me this. I've seen some people in our space community still defending that they are not stuck or stranded. And I would argue they are stuck. They cannot come home. They cannot say, all right, I'm over this, get me home. So why is there still tiptoeing around this word?
I don't know. I think to me, it's just sort of a nuance playing with words. You know, if you go technically, if something happened, a meteor came and was about to hit the ISS, could they get home in the Starliner? Well, they would certainly give it a shot. So by definition, they're not stuck. But if you look at the broader picture and what is the mission, what is it meant to achieve, and can they do a risk analysis and make a decision and say, we're going to bring you home tomorrow at noon? Clearly, the answer is no. So I think it's sort of a nuanced, you know, looking at the word stuck and kind of looking at that and maybe fixating on that word. I think that's not the issue. The broader issue is what's happening with our program to have 2 independent vehicles to be able to take astronauts up and back from the ISS. And what's going on right now? How does that impact that mission? So, I mean, that's the way I would look at it. And you could also go a little bit further and you could say, well, if necessary, they could reconfigure Crew 8's Dragon by using the cargo pallet, putting some foam down, or even, you know, if it's really a big emergency, they could get in that and, you know, it's rated up to 7 people if necessary. Even, yeah, they don't have suits and stuff, but I mean, if it's an emergency, you could possibly do that. Also, Crew 9 would be coming up configured for them if that's the decision. So, you know, they couldn't leave tomorrow, but once it gets there, they should be able to leave. So I don't know if that's a long way of saying it, but I think people are fixating on the word stuck because that sounds dramatic, or it maybe, you know, makes Boeing look bad or so. But it's clear they're clearly not able to perform the mission that they started on in the way that they wanted.
So I don't know if you've seen the video by Scott Manley, but he talked about, you know, the probability here, and you're muted, by the way, so I'll mute you in a second because the feedback is bothering me. But he talked about the probability of, you know, something actually going wrong and thinking that it's like maybe at most 1%. maybe less than 1%. And so we know that the commercial crew program, NASA, CCP, human rating standards require a probability of loss on ascent does not exceed 1 in 500, and the probability of loss on descent did not exceed 1 in 500, which I believe that Starliner is somewhere at 1 in 275. So what do you think, what is the percentage that we're looking at something going wrong?
Well, I think that's sort of the big question, and NASA themselves don't know. That's why there's that your favorite band of uncertainty right now is that they don't know with any, but they don't know with any confidence. I heard what Scott said. Is it 0.5%? Is it 10%? Is it what? Nobody that I'm aware of in an official capacity has said that. So I'm not sure where he got that information, but the point being is that NASA has a certain criteria that they will look at, and they will judge the risk that's associated with whatever criteria they have and where they are at, and they will make a decision on that. At least that's the way the process should work. And right now, as we talk today, maybe we'll hear something different in a week, but as it is right now, there's enough doubt that they are not certain, and they're not willing to take the risk until they get some additional data to figure out what is actually going on. And as we talked about these poppet valves with the Teflon, right now it appears to be affecting 5-ish or so of the thrusters, but I would assume that they're all of the same design. So who is to say that they won't all be affected, especially in a high use period of flight, like getting ready for the deorbit burn. So that's the $1 million question is what is the actual level of risk, and is it within the tolerance that NASA will accept?
You might be able to address this better than me. Is Butch's head swollen? Will he be okay if he stays in space for another few months? So there's this, question about they weren't planning to stay this long. Obviously, the longer you're in space, it has, an impact on your body. Do you think that this is a concern?
I don't think so. Actually, that's one of the things the Polaris Dawn crew is actually studying. And when you interviewed Jarrett a month or two ago, we actually talked about that. And I actually asked him about that. I said, physically, Jared's face was much different when they were in orbit than when they are on the ground. And I think it's the same thing that's going on with any of the astronauts. And it has to do with the lack of gravity. The fluid within your body tends to go up to your head, and it gives you that swollen appearance.
Yeah. This is a funny comment. Anything new from Uncertainty Band? When's the world tour? Are they coming to Finland?
I'm uncertain. I'm not sure.
Oh my God. It's too much. It's too much. Oh God, I had another question and I forgot it. There were some really funny jokes in the comments yesterday. People are not holding back talking about this. So I don't know if our special guest is going to come on, so I'll try to wrangle him another time. It's Eric Berger. He's really sort of the the star of the show here, with sort of leaking the news a few days before the presser, and probably making life a lot harder for them. But we do appreciate answers when we're not given answers from the source.
Yeah.
So
well, I saw a post that he put out about how much feedback, shall we say, he's getting on Discord and social media. And I don't know, maybe it's a reflection of our society in general. Is you take any subject whatsoever, I have a Post-it pad, look at it, and people will fight over it. They'll say it's orange. No, it's not. It's too square. It's not rectangle. And it's just amazing that people are doing that. And it's for, everybody's got their own agenda or reason. I would say for me, the reason why all of this is just so bothersome and is troubling me, and it makes me just sad, is that, we have so much promise as a country. We have so much capability. We had gone to the moon. We had the Apollo program. We were trying to build on that. And then now 50 years later, we're in a position where it just seems like so much is going wrong, and there's a lot of things behind the scene. We're seeing these reports talking about the systems or the training, and it's just so dispiriting to me, because I really wanted to see us go to the moon and inhabit it, maybe go to Mars, do a lot of stuff in space during my lifetime. And I'm wondering if that's going to happen. And I think a lot of people are thinking the same.
Well, thank goodness for SpaceX. Let's see. Eric Berger would have been interesting. I actually independently dislike some of his writing, too European French. Well, hopefully we're able to get him on. There was a question up here that has been also a question. Wasn't there a challenge with the batteries? So there was a headline that the batteries were only rated for 45 days. Is that, or, just in general, this being up there much longer than they planned for, what are some of the other complications with, certifications and ratings of, just other components?
Yeah, well, I think we talked about the battery one before, is they'll probably do a certification for a period of time that is way longer than what they anticipate. But then if they have to relook at it, they'll go back and look at the data, they'll see what they're doing, and then it's possible to recertify for another period of time. And we've seen that with things like, for example, the solid rocket boosters for Artemis are supposed to have a shelf life once stacked for a period of time, but then they recertified that. Some of the things that are unintended, and maybe I heard some people say, well, why does Crew 9 not just go up with 4 people and then they'll bring 6 back in February or whatever? The reason why is that you're limited by how much resources you have, resupply, the consumables, the water. Well, they recycle water, but food and clothing and stuff like that. So they're limited by that. Also, if they're going to continue the rotation of astronauts going and coming back from the ISS during that period of time, and I think we have Axiom maybe coming up, and I don't know, Roscosmos is bringing up some Russian astronaut or cosmonauts. So there may be limitations to what the space station can withstand as well. So there may be a variety of other constraints, whether it's physiological for the crew, whether it's just resources or supplies, or maybe, another thing that I didn't, you were asking, what did I not hear in that meeting yesterday that I'm thinking about? And one of them goes to this question is, we know that there's a helium leak, and we know that the crew physically shut off the valve to prevent the helium from leaking out. But if there's no crew on board to do that, how do you know? I mean, what is the leak amount? And will they have enough helium for them to be able to work the thrusters all the way through down to, through reentry? And I don't know. And I don't know if there's if because they have it shut off, the helium is perfectly fine, or if it's going to degrade over a period of time. And, I think maybe they're going to look at those kinds of things as well. I don't know. There may be other parts of life support within the Starliner that's only able to last for a period of time. I don't know.
Well, I want to say, Joe, thank you for coming on the show again. I have to get to my Pilates class, so I'm actually running out of time here. But I hope, actually, no, I'm going to stay because our special guest came. Hello, Eric.
Hey, how you doing, Allie?
Hi, Eric.
I'm good. How are you?
Great.
Let's see here. Let me see if I can get the layout here. Joe, I'm just going to remove you for a second, but you can stay here just so the screen. Yeah, thank you for hopping on. I do appreciate it. You're really the star of the show and everything that's going on with Starliner as far as news coverage.
Well, thank you. It's been a busy week for sure.
Yeah, talk about, I sat through the presser yesterday as well, and you asked a question. You've revealed some things ahead of the presser that, software issues, kind of confusing explanations about the software fix. So tell me, what are your thoughts following the presser yesterday?
Yeah, so I've been hearing for a couple of weeks that behind the scenes there was a lot more going on with a potential Crew Dragon rescue mission that hadn't been talked about publicly. So I reported on that about a week ago. And then I found out that the Crew 9 mission was slipping in part to account for the need to work on the software configuration of Starliner to allow an automated undocking. And so that was essentially confirmed yesterday. I thought it was quite a good news conference. They didn't cut it off at 60 minutes, and they took a lot of questions, and they answered pretty honestly. I thought Ken Bowersox did a nice job of being pretty honest about all of the dissent that's in the NASA community about how to handle this. And we're going to find out what's going to happen here probably in about a week, and we'll see what happens. But it's pretty clear that you've got Boeing engineers and management pushing pretty hard to fly Starliner as is, and some parts of the NASA community, including engineers, I think some astronauts, and flight controllers who have some reservations still.
Yeah, here we have a question from Ross. Eric, how vindicated do you feel about revealing key news headlines about Starliner in the absence of official information?
Vindicate is the wrong word. I mean, I think, the majority of the space community trusts that when I report something, I'm not just, kind of pulling it out of thin air. I will say, it was a bit stressful to kind of be out on a limb there with the August or the September 24th delay and the software issues for about 48 hours. So, you feel good about your sources, but when NASA doesn't say anything in response to queries, it's a little nerve-wracking. So it felt good.
Tell me about, you try to get into the nitty-gritty of the software issue, and we got a little bit more details about no, the software has the capability, it's just not configured for that currently. It's very surprising to me that they had that ability to autonomously undock in 2022, and why they would remove that or not have an option for both. What do you think about that?
Well, I think they do have the option for both, but you just can't push a switch and change between fully autonomous and crew operations. The way Steve Stitch explained it is that, after that flight in 2022, they basically shut off the autonomous option, worked to develop a software package that allowed for integrated operations between the software and some crew switches and potential for flying capability in case of upsets and things like that. And so I think they can't push a button and go right back to the fully autonomous. They need to update all of the parameters and stuff surrounding that. And that's it's not going to take too long, I think, to reset that from a coding standpoint. But they've got to go through and test all of that. So I was told last week it would take about 4 weeks to do that when they made a decision, and they didn't put a precise time on it yesterday, but it sounded to me like it was going to be 3 to 5 weeks, so about a month to change all of that and put it through the testing paces and so forth. It is surprising to me that they don't just have a pretty straightforward autonomous undock. That certainly exists on Crew Dragon, but apparently, from a flight software design optimization standpoint, they made decisions that made sense at the time.
I'm sure that we both would like more media briefings. What do you think about sort of how spread apart these updates are? And they're a little bit frustrated, maybe getting the same questions, but I would say you're getting the same questions because we're not getting the answers.
So I think that I was really frustrated because it had been 13 days since they'd had, they'd sort of put the people up there for questions. And, I'm a little older than you, Ellie, but back in the space shuttle days, they would have daily briefings during flight, sometimes twice daily briefings. And, you could walk into Johnson Space Center and ask PIOs questions all day, all night. And now, you send emails to press people and sometimes they don't really respond at all or substantively. And that was one of the frustrating things for me last week. I was like, well, I'm hearing all these interesting things, feel pretty good about the sources on it, so I'm just going to report it. And then 3 or 4 days later, still nothing really substantive from NASA. I said, well, I'm hearing more interesting things. I'm just going to report it because I think there's a lot of interest and there's just, when there's no official information, I kind of felt like it was important to get out there what I knew to be happening.
You are the source, and you must have some pretty good inside sources. You've been, as you said, covering this for much longer than I have. Is there anything surprising to you, or this seems like a pretty dire situation, at least in my, few years of covering space news? This seems You know, a lot of people that don't really care about what's going on in space seem to be tuning into this.
It's interesting. It's certainly the most dynamic human spaceflight story, arguably since Columbia in 2003. Just from the standpoint of you have a vehicle on orbit that there are some questions about the safety of it coming back. We haven't really faced that situation since then. I'm certainly not saying that Butch and Sonny, if they come back in Starliner, are going to have some kind of catastrophic accident. I think the odds of that are fairly low. The problem is NASA can't get to zero, I think, or near zero on that yet. But you know, it is a really kind of dramatic situation. You've got two people that were supposed to be up there, maybe not 8 days, but it was supposed to be a 2-week mission. You know, they were not going to stay 60 days. And you sort of have NASA and Boeing for weeks and weeks saying, well, things are fine. You know, we're still planning to bring them back on Starliner, you know, and we'd ask about, well, you know, are you working on, you know, alternatives? And they say, well, you know, not really. And it just, and then, you know, the reality is that they are planning this potential rescue mission. And they're going to have, NASA's going to have to bump 2 people off of Crew 4 to make it happen. And Butch and Sonny are going to have to stay 8 months on the space station. And there's a lot of work been happening behind the scenes toward that. And the other thing is that what's really different, and they mentioned this during the press conference, and actually I've been thinking about this a lot, is that, you know, never before has NASA really been in a situation where they've had 2 vehicles. You know, in this case, they have Dragon, right? It's available. It's not 100% safe, right? Spaceflight is hard, but they've had more than a dozen successful missions, and it's really difficult for NASA because on one hand, there are lots of good reasons for them to fly Butch and Sonny home on Starliner, but if for crew safety reasons they can't, then they have an alternative, and so, you know, finding that line of where you're willing to take some risk, but not enough risk when you have a safer alternative is going to be a really delicate decision for them to make.
Well, you know, I kind of wondered, do you think that they flew with a crew or, you know, humans too soon?
I don't think it's too soon. It's been a decade. I mean, you know, it's been a long time that this program has been under development. It's been more than 2 years since the uncrewed flight test. I think that we could certainly sit around and ask pretty hard questions of NASA about why, when they knew there were these thruster issues 2 years ago and they had not gotten to root cause then, why they turned around and flew very similar thrusters 2 years later on a human spaceflight vehicle.
Your dog has something to say about it. No, you're good. You're good. Yeah, you know, I read a figure that Starliner already has $5.8 billion sunken into the program, and SpaceX was able to do it with Dragon for much cheaper, and they're successful.
Yeah, we don't know how much SpaceX actually spent, and it's not clear to me whether they made money or lost money. They got $2.6 billion. Sorry about my dog.
Okay.
They got about $2.6 billion initially, and Boeing got $4.2 billion. They've both gotten some additional money since then. But it's clear that Boeing has lost $1.6 billion, and I suspect SpaceX, especially on the operational missions now, are making pretty good profit.
Yeah, I'm sure that, you know, I mean, the idea, right, is that we want to have 2 vehicles as options, but with Dragon potentially having to come to the rescue, I mean, do you think that it's, you know, people are saying it's embarrassing, but I feel like if there's any risk, that the option should be a no-brainer.
Yeah, I don't think it's embarrassing. It's, you know, this stuff is hard, and, you know, there's difficult choices to make. But I agree. Like, if NASA really is saying that crew safety is our #1 priority, and I think they do believe that, then ultimately the crew will come home on Crew Dragon. But you know, it's a tough call to make, right? Because, like, what if the risk is 1 in 100? You know, the nominal loss of crew probability that these missions were supposed to hit is 1 in 270. So where do you draw the line on what is an acceptable risk or not? And that's a really difficult decision to make. I will say, Ellie, one thing I'm pretty confident of is that NASA has a pretty robust and healthy process to review this, and I ultimately think they're going to come to the right decision whatever it is. And it does look a bit messy from the outside, and I don't think it's great that they sort of didn't say anything about preparing these alternative scenarios for a long time until it was reported that, and they kind of had to acknowledge it. But I would just say I would trust the engineers. I don't think they're going to be bought off by Boeing or anything like that. So.
Well, and as we know, there's a lot of change going on within Boeing with the new CEO, taking over today. So that's not a position I envy, but I hope that they're able to get trust back from the public. Do you think they'll be successful in that?
It's interesting. I have a couple thoughts on that. First of all, I do think that Boeing has got to be extremely upset with Aerojet Rocketdyne, which provided these thrusters, and they gave them a lot of money. And these RCS thrusters are, I mean, look, space is hard, but they're not that complicated of an engine. So, to have these problems and still be unexplained after a couple of years is it's got to be really frustrating for Boeing. And so I think that Aerojet deserves some of the blame here. In addition to Boeing, I will say I didn't think it was too cool that on Friday night they sent out this long press release basically saying we are confident in Starliner and listing through all of these tests that the vehicle had undergone. That was clearly not NASA didn't, along the way, they've both sort of been sending out the same news release. And in this case, this was a Boeing only product. So it was interesting.
Right. Thank you for the super chat from Mike Bundy. Dr. Feynman's appendix on Challenger is required reading.
Yeah, Richard Feynman was great. Was a great physicist and a member of the Challenger accident panel, and really said it like it was. And kind of the interesting thing was, after one of the lessons of Challenger in 1986 was that the culture of NASA was broken and that there really wasn't room for dissent. And unfortunately, similar problems happened in 2003 with Columbia, where there was some internal dissent on whether the foam striking the orbiter really was a catastrophic error. My reporting suggests that the culture finally has changed. And so one of the reasons we're hearing about this dissent is that there is more room for open debate at NASA today, and people feel more empowered to speak up and aren't being shut down. So I do so when I say it's a healthy process, I do think it's a healthy internal process at NASA where they're really considering, all angles of this, and it's not sort of the top level manager saying we're going to do this, for XYZ reasons.
It's an interesting question. Does the Dragon have autonomous software as well as manual? Do you know?
Yeah, most Dragon missions today are completely autonomous.
Wow.
You and I could get on board tomorrow in spacesuits and fly up there and, probably just fine.
Let's both message Elon and make it happen. What do you think about Boeing not being present?
I'm told that was NASA's choice. One person said that they were being punished for various reasons for not being at the press conference. But certainly my colleagues at the media really wanted them there. My feeling on having Boeing there was that frankly, Mark Nappy in previous press conferences has put an incredibly positive spin on things, and I didn't really feel like I was getting a whole lot from his perspective, because he would say the spacecraft's doing great every time. So it didn't really bother me that he wasn't there, but certainly some of my colleagues were pretty upset not to have Boeing there. I was wondering, beforehand if actually there was going to be a SpaceX rep there, but I guess they're not to that point yet.
Yeah, I feel like that'd be a awkward situation maybe to put them in, especially when a decision still, there's contingency.
Yeah, no, it's not going to happen. And I don't think we'll ever see at the point where there's a Boeing and SpaceX person on the same call, which would be interesting.
Yeah. I've still seen a lot of pushback to using the word stuck or stranded. Do you think that, how else do you describe it?
It's hard. I had to think about that last night as I was working on headlines. I think stranded is still pretty strong, because if you look up the definition of stranded, it's kind of like a maroon, like you're left there without any recourse. And the fact of the matter is they do have recourse, right? They have a way to come back, and it's either going to be on Starliner or Dragon. So they're not really stranded. You could say they're stuck right now. You could say they're adrift. But there's no good kind of single word that I've really come upon that fits it. I certainly am not opposed to using stranded. to some extent accurate. Certainly more accurate than the picture that NASA and Boeing painted in the previous 8 weeks, which was everything's fine. And after a few more tests, they're coming home.
Yeah, I mean, man, so many things have changed with the story and a little bit more transparency, but there seemed to be a lot of backpedaling, sort of tap dancing yesterday. I mean, you got to feel bad for the situation they're in. It was not an easy news conference.
Well, I thought Ken Bowersox yesterday was much more transparent than we've seen in the past, when there was clearly an effort to paint a glass half full picture of the situation.
Yeah. What are you looking into for the next week or so while we wait?
Well, I'm trying to find out when the decision is made before it's publicly announced. And we're also, Stephen Clark at Ars Technica are also looking at some kind of historical stories, because some of the people involved in the decision making for this mission were involved with STS-107, the Columbia mission. And so just kind of digging around the edges on that. There was this blockbuster report that came out today about the exploration upper stage that Boeing is building. And, it's like that scene in an airplane where I picked a bad week to stop sniffing glue. It's like I picked a bad week to stop writing negative stories about Boeing, because that report just shows that they're not doing a good job with that program at all.
I mean, I feel like it's got to be so defeating if you were to work for Boeing. Everyone's criticizing you, you're bad headline after bad headline. I really hope that story can change.
You would like to see it. I mean, they are this country's challenge to the rest of the world when it comes to manufacturing commercial airplanes, and it's very important. I think the United States have a viable competitor in that arena of manufacturing. And to be losing out share to a company like Airbus doesn't really speak well of Boeing, because Airbus, great company, but not the most nimble actor in the world. And certainly the U.S. spaceflight enterprise would be much better off with having 2 crew-capable vehicles to low Earth orbit than 1. I mean, people like to make fun of Boeing, and I totally get that. But the fact of the matter is, it'd be a lot better for NASA if they could actually deliver on this spacecraft.
My understanding too, I watched a video by Scott Manley about all of this following yesterday, and he was talking about how Ken actually had his own experience, with a troubled reentry. Are you going to kind of talk about that in any of your findings?
Maybe. I mean, he's got Bowersox has an interesting background. He worked at SpaceX for a little while after leaving the astronaut corps, before going to headquarters. But, in talking to different people in the industry, he was very well regarded as an astronaut. And so I think he's a good person to be, at this point, making the decision. Then it'll go on up to Jim Free at NASA headquarters, and then ultimately Administrator Bill Nelson will sign off on it.
Yeah, we have some viewers saying, do you really think that they are going to come to a decision in mid-August or next week?
Yes, I do. They have to.
Yeah, they have to. What do you think? I mean, if you had a crystal ball, what do you think we're going to see?
I think it's 60-40 Dragon at this point. I do still think that it wasn't just lip service to Boeing yesterday. There is serious concern, serious thought being given to returning them on Starliner. I do think, my sense though is that there is enough groups concerned at Johnson Space Center across the different areas of spaceflight that enough people have raised concerns that it's going to be difficult to mollify all of those concerns with enough data, because they've already gotten all the data from the tests. And so if they're doing additional reviews of data, maybe that works. I mean, in engineering, that is all possible. People could identify the root cause and everyone could become comfortable on it. But time is running out. I think from a political standpoint, it's very difficult for a high-level NASA employee to say, well, I'm going to override this dissent, but then it's my ass that's on the line, And let's be clear. Like I do think the odds. I mean, chances are, if they were to come home in Starliner, they would undock. Maybe they'll experience some minor problems, but it probably would be just fine, right? The spacecraft coming back. But on the off chance that it's not, that's, you've killed 2 people and that's career ending. And it's really, it's very, very bad news for the space agency as it's seeking more funding for its exploration goals.
Yeah, Ross wants to know, do you think there'll be another uncrewed test flight of Starliner after this current mission? Like, what is going to happen? This is supposed to be our backup or, second option aside from Dragon. So what happens now with Starliner?
All to be determined. If they come back autonomously and everything works, I could potentially see a path forward to certification. What I think may happen is that NASA will pay them to fly a cargo mission to the ISS. So instead of putting crew on Starliner, they'll load it up with cargo. They'll give them $500 million or something for the cargo mission to basically offset Boeing's costs. Because NASA would like to have this capability, but Boeing probably is not going to want to go to the well again. And so that may be a way to sort of find some money to support Boeing as it continues to try to bring Starliner online. But they're running out of chances, right? Because it's 2024. The nearest location is for a 2026 mission, and ISS is probably coming down in 2030. So they really got to get it going, or it's going to be too late to need.
Right. I just think when I heard yesterday that, February 2025, I was like, did I hear that correctly? Did that surprise you, or you kind of knew that was a possibility?
I think, first of all, I didn't know that. I knew they were looking at a bunch of different options, including like putting 1 crew member on crew 8 to come back and 1 on crew 9, putting 2 on crew 8, putting them both on crew 9, 6 people. And so it's interesting that they finally did sort of settle on an option to come back. And it's pretty clear it is pretty rough for Butch and Sonny, who were planning for a short mission and got a long increment. I know they both have families back here in Houston.
Yeah. Well, Eric, thank you so much for making time for this. I so appreciate all of your reporting. I mean, I think we all do. And so I really appreciate hearing from you after, the presser yesterday, and we'll continue to read your coverage because you're number 1, in my opinion.
Well, that's very kind. Thanks, Ellie. Have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.
All right.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I think that was great. Sorry he had to go, but
no problem.
I wanted to see if you could ask a question.
Yeah, well, the question that I wanted to ask, I didn't realize I could set it up in the chat, but I think it would have been illuminating, was during the buildup over the last several weeks when NASA started, quietly looking at potential options. Was it a surprise to them that the Starliner did not have the autonomous capability, or did they know? I think that would have been very interesting if Eric had any insights to that, and if it was a surprise, how shocked were they?
Yeah, right. Wow. Well, I think I'm going to do the same thing that I did yesterday, which is end the live stream, make a little highlight reel, and publish it. The one that I did yesterday has over 100,000 views. I mean, it's like, wow, people really want to know what's going on. So,
well, at least you have a real person with ties to be able to do your cuts with. But I was at least pretty happy to hear that almost everything that he said was in line with what we talked about yesterday, with the thinking, the impacts, the decision making. The only other question I would have asked him real quick, and it came to my mind just at the very end, was this decision that they're going to make coming up at the middle of August. Do we think that it's going to be the final decision? We are, or we are not going to use Starliner? Or are they going to try to do a middle decision where we think that we're going to implement the Dragon and start getting that spun up, but at the same time, we're going to give Boeing a little bit more time, and then we can make another decision later on so that we have both options working at the same time? And I was just thinking that they might do that so that they continue to have as many options as possible for as long as possible.
Right. Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Well, everyone, thank you so much. Truly. Joe, thank you for being so flexible. And I think, I have a background in TV news, so I'm like, I might as well start going live and just even reading headlines, because you guys care about this stuff. And so I'm curious if you guys want me to do more of this and kind of just have a casual, daily live, let me know, because this is my full-time job. So I'm here for you guys.
Things continue to where they're going. Tomorrow's going to be some shocking news.
Exactly. Well, I interviewed a space law expert this morning, and funny enough, there was an article about China's sort of Starlink copycat constellation already having issues during their launch on Tuesday. Now there's more than 50 pieces of space debris.
Actually, it's over 300 now.
Now it's over 300 pieces of space debris.
Yeah, Space Force had a press release, and they said they're tracking over 300 objects now in that orbit. So they deployed a lot more than they expected.
That's crazy. Oh my gosh. Okay, well, we're getting a lot of yes live, yes please, more Ellie, more Ellie, more Ellie in space. Well, good. Well, then I will do more of this and get over my fear of, not having a perfect polished script. And hopefully I can make some of you guys laugh. Sometimes I try a little humor in there. But great. Well, thank you guys so much. I'm going to end the stream, and hopefully we'll see you maybe tomorrow.
Take care.